Sam worked in marketing, and like most people who worked in marketing, he hated his job. At Core Incorporated, a company which worked only on the most ridiculous marketing campaigns, he worked in the most ridiculous department, the synergy snakes. All the departments at Core Incorporated followed a similar theme. The publicity pigs, the management monkeys, the technology tigers, the strategy sharks. It was quite a risky naming system, but fortunately, all of the publicity pigs were fit and healthy. There weren't any black or Asian employees in the management monkeys or technology tigers, and the strategy sharks had never bitten anyone's legs off. So far, Sam very much did not feel like a synergy snake. He'd heard the name was chosen years ago when the original team worked together like a family and were the living face of the company. And as exciting as that may sound to someone fresh out of business school, synergy really just meant reading boring emails full of spelling mistakes and answering phone calls from your boss at 5 a.m. Still, as long as synergy didn't mean getting on with your colleagues, Sam was safe. If the rest of the team were snakes, he was a cardboard tube with eyes and a tongue painted on. He spent the first few months at the company feeling like he had just walked in on the birthday party of someone he didn't know. Every time he tried to make a funny comment or give an opinion, his coworkers looked at him like he had just sneezed on their salad. Things only got worse at the annual Christmas party when Sam made a jokey to his boss, Mr. Krakow, about their latest marketing campaign. And his boss looked at him strangely and replied, "I don't see how that's funny. Dog makeup is a very important new industry, Sam. If you were a dog, I'd put makeup on you." And then all the people around him sniggered. Sam was so embarrassed that he went and ate 5 slices of snake-shaped cake, not knowing it was filled with champagne cream. A few minutes later, his dinner of caviar pizza promptly decided that, while it had been nice to visit, it wanted to live outside of Sam's stomach rather than inside. As Sam watched a mixture of food and blue disappear into the toilet, he realized something. Snakes weren't into synergy. Snakes, real snakes, were cold-blooded killers. Snakes worked alone, so why not be the most snake-like of all? When he came back to work in the new year, Sam walked into the office, looked at no one, greeted no one, and slid straight into his chair. His heart beat like a teenager smoking their first cigarette. He was sure that, at any moment, his line manager Wendy would come and have a tough chat with him. "A hello costs you nothing" was one of her favorite phrases, and last year they'd started doing a snake dance before starting work each day. But Wendy didn't talk to him. She walked straight past his desk. In fact, as long as he avoided making eye contact and saying hello, everyone more or less ignored him. That was the best and worst day of Sam's life, the day he realized that nobody cared about him. Perhaps he had embarrassed himself so much at the Christmas party that he had simply turned invisible. Or perhaps he was the only one in the department doing any actual work, and everyone recognized that it was better to leave him alone while they talked about the latest Netflix series and did afternoon snake yoga. It was a thrilling feeling. Yes, he could get hit by a car and nobody would notice until he missed a deadline. But at the same time, he didn't have to take part in their stupid games. But after several months, the joy of the discovery wore off. Sam was certainly more relaxed now that he didn't have to pretend to be a synergy snake, but it was like spraying a toilet with Febreze and saying you'd cleaned it. At the end of the day, the place was still full of shit. One particular Monday, a few years later in June, Sam slid into his chair as usual and saw that he had an email from his boss, Mr. Krakow. He signed the email with Crack, the name he forced them to call him. Mr. Krakow was Polish, although you wouldn't know from his perfect English, packed with all the awful business terms that came in and out of fashion like jeans. Sam doubted Krakow was his real name because it was like an English person being called Mr. Bristol or a French person called Madame Marcise. But given their interaction at the Christmas party, he thought it was best not to say this. The email was short. Emergency stand-up today. 9:30 in the forest. Crack stand-up was one of those fashionable new terms. Sam opened a file called Snake to English Dictionary to remind himself what it was. A kind of meeting where they weren't allowed to sit down. Wonderful. The idea was that the meetings were short and happened every day, but Krakow called a stand-up whenever he felt like it, and sometimes he talked for 40 minutes or more, until even the yoga lovers were falling over. Even worse, it was in the forest, the Synergy Snake's private meeting room. There were cartoons of long grass and snakes painted on the wall, like in a children's hospital, and the air conditioning was broken, making it a sweaty jungle in summer. Sam sighed, grabbed his iced coffee, and entered the forest. Unfortunately, he was 5 minutes early, and the only other person there was his line manager, Wendy. "Ah, Sam. Perfect," she said joylessly. "Just the man I wanted to see. We need to touch base later, yeah? Have a look at your latest achievements. Won't take 5 minutes." In a few sentences, Wendy had displayed all of her worst habits. She spoke in a low, rough voice, presumably because she thought it made people take her more seriously. She used just as many business words as Krakow, and she lied constantly. But none of that bothered Sam. What shocked him was that she was talking directly to him. Usually, when one of his colleagues wanted to say something to him, they emailed it, even if they were only one desk over. This could only be bad news. "I'm free after lunch," said Sam, panicking. His diary for the day was completely empty, but he knew Wendy loved to have meetings before, during, and after lunch. Perfect. "Can we do it during lunch? I have a meeting with the Sharks this afternoon, and we're going to be drilling down." Even worse, Sam would probably spill food on himself like an idiot if his anxiety even allowed him to eat. Before he could even reply, Wendy said, "Great," and went to bother someone else. Just then, Krakow walked in. "Right, guys, thank you for coming. Always a pleasure to touch base with you all." Everyone quickly stopped leaning against the wall as Krakow launched into a long speech about how they needed to keep their energy levels up. "Remember, guys, you're the Synergy Snakes." He also mentioned the meeting with the Sharks in the afternoon. "We're going to drill down until we find diamonds and then keep on going. Oh, and I'm touching base with the Tigers this morning. So, I won't be answering any emails today. If you need anything, just shout at me over lunch." Sam wondered how these people communicated with their families at home. Were their children allowed to talk to them outside of dinner time? Did they read them bedtime stories or just put on a personal development podcast? Did they even have children or pets or friends? Thankfully, the meeting only lasted 20 minutes, as people were passing out from the heat. Sam slid back to his computer and put his feet in the ice bath he hid under his desk. Finally, he could get to work. He wrote responses to a few emails that were actually important and then scheduled them to send later in the day. In his experience, the quicker you worked, the more work people gave you. And whenever he finished all his work, something uncomfortable happened. People started talking to him. It was like some kind of magic spell. As long as a cloud of business floated around him, he was left alone. But if he actually worked hard, then his colleagues, on some level, started to realize that they were doing nothing, and more ridiculous tasks were created to punish him. So once that was out of the way, he opened YouTube and started watching cat videos. If anyone asked him what he was doing, he would call it research. Cat makeup is definitely the next big thing. After an hour of that, Sam worked on a report Wendy had sent him. It was on the efficiency of remote working. Except from the tone of Wendy's email, it was clear that he was meant to write about the inefficiency of remote working. So he'd written a long essay about how remote working would cause people to spend too much time with their friends and family. Rest well and, horror of all horrors, show up to meetings in their pajamas. He'd actually finished it a few days ago, but he heard Wendy complaining about the pajamas during the stand-up and made sure to emphasize that part. He sent it off, and a suspiciously short time later, Wendy replied with, "Very good, and I totally agree that pajamas kill company culture." Sam yawned and wondered if the meeting later had been linked to the report. Either way, it was great timing to send it in now. Remind Wendy how hard he worked just before talking to her. He saw that it was 11, so he got up for his daily cup of tea with Risha in the break room. She was one of the technology tigers and one of the few people in the company whose brain hadn't melted into business-flavored soup. "I thought you were touching base with Krakow this morning," Sam said, handing Risha her tea. He had his own personal mug from home that he kept hidden in his desk. Once, he'd left his mug in the kitchen and someone had accidentally broken it. "Yes. Well, somebody has to fix the coffee machine," said Risha, taking the last chocolate bourbon from a big box of biscuits. Sam knew that she had been here all morning, reading her magazine and working away at the chocolate bourbons. Risha was like a ghost. She had worked at the company for years, and people genuinely seemed to have forgotten she existed. Terrible thing, isn't it? I guess it didn't get the memo. "Poor thing," she said, stroking the coffee machine like a dog. "We're going to have to squeeze it out, but let's give it a chance. This is an amazing place to work after all. It probably just got too excited and passed out, like at one of Krakow's stand-ups. It'll get the memo eventually." She sat down and returned to her magazine. Sam sat across from her and sipped his tea. They often sat in silence. It was nice after being in the main office full of chatting snakes and tigers. Sam considered telling Risha about his meeting with Wendy, but he didn't see the point. It was probably nothing. And he didn't want to break the peace. He finished his tea. "See you later." "Oh, I don't know if I'll be around. I might have to drill down with my friend here." She pointed at the box of biscuits. He laughed and left. After replying to some more emails, Sam went on his favorite website, a forum where people complained about their jobs. There was a thread from someone saying they had just been squeezed out of their company for stealing sheets of paper. It was ridiculous, really, because everyone took office supplies every now and then. The secret was not to get caught. But still, sheets of paper. Sam was fortunate he had Risha. who had taught him all her best tricks. When he'd started the job, he always offered to take minutes at the meetings, because that way he didn't have to say anything. But Risha taught him a better technique. Ask one question every 15 minutes, something boring and technical, like a grammar mistake. It showed that you were paying attention and made you look like a team player, but didn't require you to actually think. Sam had done this for long enough that he barely had to say anything now. He finished reading the thread about being squeezed out, then got up to go sort the filing cabinet. It was amazing how messy the others left it. There were already a few new documents, the minutes of that morning's stand-up, as well as a report from one of the pigs who had just got back from a business trip. Funny, Sam didn't remember anyone taking minutes that morning. As he picked up the folder to move it into the correct place, a folded piece of paper fell out. Curious, he bent down to pick it up. There was an S written on it, long and round like a snake. He blinked and looked around. Everything looked normal. His colleagues were sitting at their desks, throwing a ball of paper to each other and shouting out ideas for the next company trip. Sam turned back to the filing cabinet and unfolded the paper. Balyu is trying to squeeze you out. He froze. His heart beat faster and faster until his chest shook like a tower in an earthquake. He was far too young to be having heart problems, but Sam had never had much of a choice in these things. His head went foggy as he tried to figure out what this could mean. Well, obviously meant Wendy, but why would she be trying to squeeze him out? Cold sweat ran down his forehead as he thought back over everything he'd done in the past week. He couldn't think of any mistakes he'd made, and he got the report in on time. So what was the problem? But she did want to touch base with him. He took a deep breath and chewed on a nail. Wendy and Krakow were drilling down with the strategy sharks that afternoon. The sharks were a department Sam really didn't understand. They never left their offices, and at company parties, they stood in a tight circle, drinking whiskey and vodka and laughing loudly at whispered jokes. Could the meeting with the sharks be about cutting people out of the company? The whole reason Sam got the job originally was because the company had fired a bunch of people and then realized they needed more. It came to be known as the squeezing, but everyone acted like it would never happen again. The company had lost a lot of money, except maybe things had changed, and maybe now was not the time to be keeping to oneself. He turned the paper over, looking for a sign of who'd written it, but there was nothing aside from the S. With shaking hands, he put it in his pocket and returned to his desk. He couldn't lose this job. He couldn't. When he'd started, he was several months behind on bills and had a loan to pay off for the year he spent after his sick mother. He was only now starting to feel financially secure, and he was hardly going to get a good letter of reference from Wendy if she was the one squeezing him out. He went to the kitchen to try and find Risha, but she was gone. Not even her magazine remained. He tried to make a coffee, forgetting that the machine was broken, and it sprayed hot water in his face. "Fuck!" cried Sam. He dried his face with a dirty tea towel, ate 10 biscuits, and returned to his desk. He took some painkillers, bit the inside of his mouth, and forced himself to think. The atmosphere in the room had definitely changed. Many more people were doing actual work than before. The word was spreading. By the sounds of it, the Strategy Sharks meeting was going to be big. So that must be where they were going to officially decide who was getting fired. In that case, Wendy's meeting with Sam was probably to help her decide whether he should get squeezed out or someone else. Their department was small, less than 30 people, so it was unlikely they were getting rid of many. That meant Wendy hadn't made her final decision. Sam felt a small ray of hope. He had one chance left. What could he do to convince Wendy he should stay? Clearly, hard work wasn't enough. He couldn't rely on a good personal relationship with her either. "Everything all right here, Sammy? Say, why's your hair wet?" Sam jumped. It was Eric, his least favorite colleague. "I'm great," he said dryly. "I ran my head under some cold water. It's a great way to boost your energy. You should try it." "Great tip, Sammy, but you still look a bit sad. Sure there's nothing wrong?" "I left my oven on this morning," said Sam, staring at his computer and hoping Eric would leave him alone. "Making croissants? Well, maybe you can leave early and turn it off."